What's the date? 20th, right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Development Committee, 20th of July 2017. First of all, our emergency evacuation announcement. In the event of a fire or other emergency, please exit the building in an orderly manner to the assembly point, which is located in the market car park. There are 2 fire exits located in the room, clearly indicated by the green fire exit signs. Please don't delay the evacuation by collecting any belongings, and the premises must not be re-entered until the fire service has given the all clear. Please remember it's against the law to smoke on these premises, and also note that the meeting will be audio recorded. Thank you. Item 1 is apologies for absence. There are none. There are no substitute members. Non-members attending. I have Councillor Stanley, Hoy and Gooding. Thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of May 2017. Are you happy for me to sign those as a correct and accurate record of that meeting? Thank you. Declarations of interest. That's a step-toe.
Thank you, Chair. Non-pecuniary interest, as I'm a member of Essex County Council, with regards to item 6, I believe it is. Yes, item 6.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Non-pecuniary interest, item 6, member of Rochford Parish Council, ward councillor for that area, and I have a relative living in Roach Way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Members, just before we get on to the items, there's an addendum with some 1 or 2 significant changes to the items. Can you confirm that you've all got that you've seen it, you've had chance to take it all in? It wasn't circulated immediately at the time of the minutes. Okay, happy to proceed on that. Okay. Just for our visitors, the format for the meeting is we'll take each item, the officers give a presentation, then any visiting speakers that have pre-booked will talk, then it's our non-members, then the members of the committee who will discuss prior to making a decision. There's one small change I'd like to make to the running order, and that's to swap items 7 and 8 around. But our first one is item 6, Youth Opportunities Centre, Roachway, Rochford, demolition and redevelopment. And for a first time, we have Mr. Arville Evans to present to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, please, on a point of order. Can I just request the reason for the swapping of the order of the agenda?
It's because of an appointment that one of our visitors has. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members and members of the public. I'll just run through a few slides and introduce this scheme. I'm sure members have had time to read the report, and the report is also published for the benefit of members. So we'll go through a few slides and take it from there. Right, so what we have is the development site itself. I'm just going to stand up here. So this is the former college, sports fields to the rear. This is the southwest corner of the southeast corner of the application site. So we're looking in a northerly direction, and Rochway is obviously this road here. So just to give you an appreciation of the site context, so we'll go through a few slides. If you go on to slide 2, so this is the existing site plan. Just bear with me. Sorry. So that is the extent of the application site as edged in red on the plan. So this is the footprint of the existing building. This is the northwest corner of the site, with Rochway being here. And you can see that obviously on the north side of the site and to the west, there is residential development. Over here to the east is designated green belt. To the south are the sports pitches, which are also designated open space, which are also green belt. Just to clarify, as in the report, the site itself actually is also designated green belt, despite actually constituting built form at present. We'll go on to slide 3. So this is the actual site layout plan as it currently exists. So it indicates that there is parking, although it's not marked in sort of any paint. Obviously, there is parking to the frontage of the site at the moment, which is understood to be used in connection with the use of the sports pitches to the south. We have Disability Essex as well, which is, let's have a look, which is in here somewhere. I'm not sure where that is now, but it's Disability Essex.
Building off the end of the
Down there, isn't it?
One down.
It's this one here, isn't it? Disability Essex there, which is accessed via that car park area to the front at the moment. Go on to slide 4. So just to brief those persons who haven't got the benefit of knowing the site intimately. So this is just a shot looking at the site from Rochway at the northwest corner of the site. You can see this distinctive boundary wall with railings, which the development proposes will be kept as part of the development, with the exception of a central access point into the site. So it's a single-storey building with a large roof void. That's how I describe the building. A brick building, quite imposing building. We'll move on to the next slide. This is just a shot looking at the site from the other direction. So this is the current access. So this is taken from the north east corner of the site from Rochway. Now the reasons for showing you these is basically just to give you the site context in its entirety. So this shot is taken from a public footpath which is to the east of the site, so from within the green belt. Currently you have a line of trees along the boundary of the site, which these trees, it is proposed, some of them will be crowned in order to make way for the development. So the development will be built quite close to that eastern boundary with the green belt. So if we move on. So this is Purdy's Way. So just to give you a perspective looking in a southerly direction. And the next shot will give you another viewpoint. So we're going round in a circle. So this is looking north. So what we have then is off the plan here is Rochway. But as in sort of coming out and spurring out into the green belt, we have built form here, which continues in that northerly direction. So although, I think what these pictures seek to emphasise is, although the site is on the edge of the green belt, it's not a continuous straight line, so it does, the settlement does jut out into areas of the green belt in that manner. So if we move on. This is a site again looking northeast, so we're having a 360-degree view from the site, if you like, just to set it in perspective. If we move on. Again, that's looking east towards the mills. Is it Stambridge Mills? The mill building is here, quite an imposing building. So it is rural in character when looking out from the site in an easterly direction. However, it is residential and built up in character when one is looking in the other direction. So, okay, that's Stambridge Mills, and that's then we've gone a 360-degree circle now back to the Purdy's building. So that's just to set it in its perspective, really, just for benefit. So there we are, and this is a shot just to provide another angle of the site, which is taken from the southeastern corner of the sports pitches, looking at the rear elevation then of the building. Thank you. So we'll just move on. So I'll just set out the development for you. As per report, in effect, so slide 13, scheme layout phase 1 and 2. So the scheme will take place in 2 phases. Phase 1 being this development of 14 open market dwellings, which will be 2 and 3 and 4 bedroom dwellings, served by this central spine road, which will provide access to the sports field. That's the intention. So, and then phase two will be this development of 60 independent living apartments served by 31 car parking spaces at the rear. And the idea is to have this sort of like central courtyard area with an outlook from the apartment developments into a safe central enclosed environment in the middle, but also providing views out into the open countryside in an easterly direction. We'll go on then to the street view. So just to give you a flavour, so if one was standing in Rochway looking at the development, this would be the frontage of the site. So what we have here is these 2.5-storey type townhouses, 5 of them, consisting of a mix of brick material with aluminium, highly efficient windows, pitched roof as you can see. There'll be a balcony area with a garage underneath, so they look like link houses. And then there is a different type house on the corner just to give the site some distinctiveness. And this is the central access point, the spine road leading into the site in a southerly direction. And you can see the 3-storey apartments, actually, they're not actually any higher, if slightly lower, in terms of the height when compared to the 3-storey townhouses. So that's basically a street view. These flat apartments will be served by their own private terrace at the front. There will be a hedge boundary to the front separating them from Rochway. The existing wall will be left intact and closed in that area where the existing access is. That brick wall will be closed up. So there will be, the effect will be there'll be an enclosure between the public realm, which is that of Rochway, and the private realm, which is the terraced area that will serve the apartments at ground floor level. And then you have a further 2 stories of flatted apartments within phase 2. So if we move on. So this is basically just showing the site layout again, just to explain what we have. We'll come on to the type of houses that are proposed. But the garden areas that will serve the properties, they're all in excess of 100 square metres, therefore complying with the national space standards on amenity space to serve dwellings. So these will be the townhouses that you've just seen on the plan then, with further dwellings sitting behind those served by private garden space with an outlook onto the street scene, if you like. And then basically, whilst phase 1 is in progress, the plan indicates how parking will be safeguarded for use by those people who wish to participate in sport on the sports pitches. So that clearly identifies phase 1 and what will happen on site during phase 1, which will be the provision of this parking area for the duration of phase 1. Move on. So again, I think this is quite useful just to show you, give you a flavour of what actually that development would be like if you were on site, as it were. So these is the frontage again with Rochway. So you've got the garage and the link, and then the terrace above. So you know that is the design, and basically just shows again, just gives you a long section, just indicating, gives you a better idea of what actually a place would feel like when it's actually built and established. If you move on. Again, so what we've got here, we've got different type houses. This is the type A house, which is the 2.5-storey townhouses. So there's a mix of 4 types. So we'll move on to the next slide, which shows type B. Yeah. Okay, just bear with us, please. Thank you. Type B house. Okay, so you can see just a mix of materials really. So I think as part of any residential development, the applicant has identified, in line with design practices, a mix of materials which gives the site interest and variety. So what we have here is, it's not a 2.5-storey dwelling, the type B house, which these are the houses that will sit behind the type A houses, which are the frontage houses. We'll move on. Again, that's the type C dwelling. And we'll move on to the last type, which is the type D. So that's the type D dwelling. We'll go on now to the phase 2 elevations. So this elevation here is let's have a look. This is the elevation along the site frontage. So that's just giving you the effect. So you can appreciate, I think the reason we're showing you these is for you to appreciate scale. Now the photograph, the slide at the bottom actually shows a section through the actual building, if you like. It's not a multi-storey car park. It may appear like that, but it just shows you the heights of the actual accommodation itself. So it's a shot through the side of the building, just to give you an idea of height. So we'll move on to the next slide. Again, this shot here, I think, is the eastern aspect, I think. But it's a long elevation, so the elevations are very similar, really, in terms of scale. The important thing to note is the scale of the windows, and the height and the massing and the design, really. So there's a parapet roof, effectively. So in terms of, it won't be completely sort of like a felt roof. There is a parapet, so that's an important part of the design as well. And if there are any questions emerging from this, I don't mean to cover it in great detail, but I just want to show you the scale and the extent of the elevation. So we'll move on to the next elevation, please. Again, I think that's a shot looking from the bottom of the site through at the rear of the frontage apartment. So standing south at the back of the site, looking through at the rear elevation of the frontage building with Rochway. So we'll move on. And again, just to give you a flavour, that is a perspective view of the applications of the phase 2. So that's the kind of feel that it's proposed to be created by this development. So there will be a private terrace at the ground floor with a small terrace with glass balustrading, etc., on the first and second floor. You know, the important element is, you know, solid to void ratio. There's nice large windows in terms of providing outlook, etc. So I think that's that. I'd like to just sort of summarise. I'm not, obviously, the intention of this evening is not for me to go through the report, but I just want to go through key issues, and I'm going to show you a few more slides before handing back to the chair. So I think the important issues are the principle of acceptability of the scheme. So these are covered under the section 5 of the report. So I think these, for the council, these are the key considerations for discussion as it is considered by officers. So the principle of acceptability, point 5.7 of the report, in summary, indicates that the site has no specific allocation, as it could not be anticipated at the time of the preparation of the development plan that the site would become vacant. Point 5.8 of the report indicates fundamentally that despite being within the green belt, the site itself is located within an area which is partly enveloped by built form. So in terms of, if you could remember the photographs I showed you, in terms of the properties to the west of the site, i.e. Disability Essex, and the properties at Rochway, that sort of encapsulates that principle. So it is enveloped by built form. 5.10 of the report considers the principle of safeguarding the character and openness of the green belt, which is a fundamental objective of Chapter 9 of the National Planning Policy Framework, and considers the question as to whether the objective of planning policy in this respect would be undermined by the proposed development. Those are the key issues. 5.12 of the report considers the fundamental principle of whether the proposed development is considered to be an appropriate development. Inappropriate development being that key consideration within the National Planning Policy Framework, which by definition would be harmful to the green belt, and which should only be sort of approved and permitted in exceptional circumstances. The National Planning Policy Framework indicates that when considering planning applications, local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the green belt. Very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the green belt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations. You will note from point 5.13 of the report, which highlights the exceptions which include limited infilling or partial or complete redevelopment of previously developed sites, i.e. brownfield land, whether redundant or in continuing use. So the National Planning Policy Framework therefore indicates there are exceptions which basically justifies development within the green belt. 5.15 of the report, just to summarise, has to be considered within the context of the built development it physically forms part of. I think that's the main consideration within the report. And 5.16 of the report concludes that the development is not an appropriate development as defined by paragraph 87 of the National Planning Policy Framework, on the basis that it is acceptable to develop on previously developed land. You will note from the report quickly that there are other material planning considerations we've taken into account. The provision of specialist housing is in section 5.19 of the report. The need for specialist accommodation is covered in 5.26 of the report. Affordable housing provision and tenure. The proposals propose 41% affordable housing provision. The housing mix, which is section 5.39. Phase 1 is 2, 3 and 4 bedroom houses and independent living of 1 and 2 bedroom houses in phase 2. So it accords with policy on the basis of the housing mix. The landscaping section indicates that there's landscaping in place to replace those trees being lost on the eastern boundary of the site on a 1-to-1 ratio, which is considered acceptable. Transport and highways is covered in section 5.59. It's a sustainable location and it's concluded there was no impact upon the operation of existing road network. Ecology, that's been covered by the survey with mitigation, which will be subject to the European Protected Species licensing process. The drainage, the site is in a flood zone 1, which is low risk. The drainage strategy is considered acceptable, where there will be no spillage of drainage of surface water drainage onto the road. The foul drainage is onto a gravity system. The national space standards have been complied with, as mentioned earlier. The operational impacts in terms of development of the site and impact upon amenity can be controlled by condition. Right, the key issue now, I'd like to just refer back to the slides before closing, and I'd like to consider the relationship of this site to the other built form. So it's slide 0.26. Just to consider the... Right. So in terms of aiding members and the public to understand how officers have come to the conclusion about design and layout acceptability, we have to look at this development in relation to the built form around it. So what we have is a mix of dwelling types within the area. There is no strong design reference, such as there would be, for example, along 19 South Street or somewhere like that. We'll move on. So 027, that's the existing built form on Rochway. And this is leading then on to the design and layout acceptability. Just looking from the back of the site at this, at these houses. So I just want to sort of conclude my presentation by looking then at one of the other key issues within the report, which is design and layout acceptability. You'll note, members, that points 5.43 to point 5.51 of the report highlights the key issues being addressed and concluded in point 5.48 of the report. And basically what the report concludes is that the development is considered acceptable given that there is a lack of any strong sense of architectural character in the area. Development would not be out of keeping or incongruous with the locality, such that it is considered that the development would comply with policy DM1, which is the design policy. Point 5.49 of the report also considers policy DM2, which considers the efficient use of a site in a manner which is compatible with its use, intensity, scale and character of the surrounding area. The scheme does this with a density of 74 dwellings per hectare. The scheme is considered to accord with the policy DM2, including the Essex Design Guide and the nationally prescribed space standards. And just to emphasise this point, I'd like to show you slide 029, which is you note the 3-storey townhouses along the frontage. Well, this is sort of the design reference for this street. There are lower storey dwellings along this street, but if you consider what has just been indicated with design and layout and acceptability, that is the type of design form that you see along Rochway. So one has to consider, is that development by reason of its massing and scale so totally out of character and out of sync with what's around it that it could be deemed to be harmful? And the conclusion based on what I've just read out is that it isn't harmful. I'd like to show you slide 030. Again, that's the corner of the street and quite a large imposing building, almost a 2.5-storey building. So comparing that to the development, that's how officers have come to the conclusion on the design. And then 0.031, just to show there's an eclectic mix of properties. Just to move on and to close, we've noted the public objections and the impact upon residential amenity that's been raised. Points have been raised by Rochford Parish Council. These points are covered, points of objection by the public are all obviously covered in points 5.127 to 5.132. So, in summary, there's a perception of harm. So we've looked at the issues around the perceived appropriateness of this development within this setting and the relationship of the proposed development to the existing built form. So we understand there are concerns. However, given the distance that the properties are across the way, now phase 1 is set back 13 metres from the edge of Rochway. Granted, phase 2 is brought much closer to Rochway. However, the outlook is over a street, and it's concluded that the key issue really is whether the degree of overlooking and that perception of overlooking is overbearing. And when one looks at the calculation for what is considered to be overbearing, I would have to conclude that the scheme isn't overbearing by reason of visual dominance or overbearing overlooking. The parking issue is the final issue that I want to just mention. You will note that during phase 1, this is the parking arrangement. We're aware that this is a historic use of a sports field and also designated open space where people walk their dogs and walk with their families, etc. So one of the key issues is when phase 2 is developed, at whatever time that would be, where would the parking currently provided and to be provided during phase 1? The issue revolves around the appropriate provision of an alternative parking solution. And that we have received a response yesterday from Sports England, and I'll just read the summary of the response. Currently, it's an objection is made to the planning application as a statutory consultee in its current form. Sport England supports the revised officer recommendation to defer the decision on the application to allow a permanent and deliverable parking solution to support the use of the adjoining playing field to be fully explored. If the application is approved against the latest officer recommendation, our position would be an objection and the application would need to be referred to the Secretary of State to allow consideration to be given to whether the application should be called in for his determination. So just to conclude, therefore, members, you will note that an addendum was prepared yesterday, and in line with the advice received from Sports England yesterday, which is reflected in point 4 of the addendum under item 6, it is now my revised recommendation further to the issuing of the report that the application be deferred in order to provide Sport England to consider this matter further and for the relevant parties to explore solutions. And on that note, I'd like to pass back to the Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, we have got an officer recommendation for deferment. However, we have got some people that would like to speak on this item, and I do think in the way of helping us ultimately to make a proper decision, I think it is worth us pursuing with discussion tonight, and to determine whether we want to defer or not, rather than having a motion for for approval or rejection. So I'm proposing that we move forward on the basis of the offered of recommendation for deferment, but the purpose being to hear out the arguments to allow us to make a fuller and more comprehensive decision at a later stage. So our first speaker is Mr. Jerry Gibson from Rochford Parish Council. And you'll have 5 minutes, and then we'll let you know when you've got a minute to go.
Thank you.
You're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Jerry Gibson, Watchford Parish Council. The Parish Council has a number of concerns about this particular development, and I'll outline those briefly. The first one is we believe it's the 60 assisted living places is overdevelopment. It'll make the site very crowded, but also there is an excess of supply over demand for assisted living within Rochford itself. Our second major concern is, as the planning officer referred to, this issue of parking. When I was involved with junior football many years ago, you used to get maybe one mum and dad and a very love-struck girlfriend coming to watch the games. Now it's a family outing. The whole family come, and grandparents and aunts and uncles come. And surprise, surprise, they all come by car. And the difficulty is that the residents of Rochway are concerned that unless there's some sort of traffic survey done as to the amount of cars that come to matches, then there will be parking spilling over onto the roadway, and a number of them have dropped curbs, and if people turn up late for matches, they park anywhere. The third concern is public transport. The report makes reference to the fact that public transport is close by. Now, as you may have gathered, I've got limited mobility, and the nearest bus stop to Southend is 10 minutes walk away, and the nearest bus stop from Southend is 15 minutes walk away and involves crossing 3 very busy roads. The fourth concern is that someone said that's all irrelevant because people can use mobility scooters to get around Rochford. The difficulty with that, those of you who know Rochford, is that the pavements are very narrow in the centre of Rochford, and one often comes across people driving their mobility scooters in the road rather than on the pavements because of the nature of the pavements. Fifth, there is the problem of aircraft noise. Rochford Airport is developing, as we all know, which some of us are very pleased about, but planes are now taking off and landing right over this particular site. Landing's not too bad, taking off makes an awful lot of noise. My last point, Chair, is that this building, the Adult Community College, where I was privileged to be Chairman of Governors for 10 years, has iconic status in Rochford. Generations of Rochford folk attended the school when it was a school, 3 or 4 generations in some family cases. And what we would ask, Chair, is that if the committee decide to approve the application, that there be a caveat placed on it that the developer has to provide some sort of public amenity replacement for the college. We're not over blessed with public amenity in Rochford, and so therefore it would be a great help to the town. We know we had the Freight House. We're not sure about the future of that. We've got the parish rooms and we've got the Women's Institute Hall, but neither of them are that big. So we would want a replacement community facility from the developer, if that could be arranged. That's all, Chair. Thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Chair. That's Rochford Council's view on the situation, and we ask you to reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Stephen Butler, who's the agent. I'll let you have know when you've got a minute to go.
Thank you, Chairman, members and officers. My name is Stephen Butler and I am from Bidwells. I am the planning agent representing Essex Housing on this planning application. Essex Housing is a new function hosted by Essex County Council on behalf of all Essex public sector partners. Essex Housing is tasked with delivering new housing on its and its partners' surplus property assets across the county. The delivery of new housing on the former adult community learning site on Roach Way would fulfil this purpose locally within Rochford. The scheme would deliver 60 units of independent living accommodation alongside 14 family dwellings, comprising 74 residential units in total. Independent living is a new concept which is designed to provide new housing, care and support to vulnerable older people. It is Essex Housing's intention to move as far away as possible from the traditional model of institutional care to care in the community, where people can live independently and with dignity in their own homes with the care and support they require. Independent living still gives the reassurance of 24-hour care on site. It provides community facilities to help residents stay connected to their friends and neighbours. The environment is safe and supported, and there is the option for residents to continue living with their partner if only one of them has a care need. Within the independent living accommodation, there would be a 50-50 split of private and affordable accommodation. Within the proposed development as a whole, this equates to 41% affordable housing provision, which significantly exceeds the policy requirement. It is also necessary to bear in mind that this policy exceeding affordable housing provision is proposed on a site where vacant building credit would be applicable. The applicant could therefore justifiably reduce the affordable housing significantly, but is choosing not to because of the wider public benefits the independent living proposals would bring to Rochford. This previously developed site within walking distance of Rochford town centre is a sustainable location for the proposed development. Working with officers, we have formulated a scheme design which we believe is acceptable. Importantly, it would retain vehicle access to the Disability Essex Trust Links site to the west, as it is legally obliged to do. Demolition of the existing unlisted building on site enables the new development to optimise the use of the site. Furthermore, the Highways Authority has no objection to the proposals, including the amount of parking proposed for the independent living accommodation and the private market units. The scheme would accord with Greenbelt policy because it is previously developed land. We acknowledge the functional requirements of the Hambro Colts, who use the land to the rear of the application site as sports pitches, and who currently use the hard standing at the front of the application site as parking. This is why, taking account of the amended recommendation from your officers put forward in the addendum, we have commenced discussions with Sport England to explore potential ways of accommodating the displaced car parking. We are working with your planning officers and Sport England to deliver a solution that is acceptable to all parties in this respect. I therefore respectfully request that you note the officer's recommendation to enable Essex Housing to explore this solution fully. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stanley, you're the first of our visiting members that's indicated.
First of all, I'd like to say
Okay.
that's better. First of all, it's about the parking situation. Is there adequate parking? I noticed from the slide that they had one car in the road, which showed the vehicle access. Just how are the other cars going to get past in that road when they're occupied? Two or three cars per unit on the housing that's going to be built there. As for the parking for the playfields or for football and what have you, we have a similar problem in Rorif where we haven't got adequate parking places for the cars. Approximately, we're told was approximately 300 cars were going to be parked at this particular venue. It turned out to be 2,000 cars. And how you're going to get 2,000 cars to those playing fields or anywhere near those playing fields is going to be quite difficult. So on the parking situation, I find that a bit difficult for that site. Where we've got the housing, and we say 2.5 houses, they're really 3-storey, and obviously the land slopes away, I think, to the left to adequate the same level, rooftop level. Could I ask, in some cases they're going to be flat roofed properties, even though they've got a parapet round. Could I ask if is that compliant with the design or for the council to pass? And also, is it dormers that are on the front, or are they windows in the roof themselves? Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mr Hoy.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. The concerns I have around parking as well, I'd just like confirmation around the actual numbers here. We've got 14 commercial residential dwellings in the first phase, which are not assisted living, they're just full market properties, which would require under the standard 24 spaces plus visitor spaces, which I can't quite recall what number would be. I think I'd make that 28 or 29 in total. And then we're going to have a phase 2. Can you confirm how many spaces will be available for the phase 1 properties and how many are for the phase 2? And then also agree to on the basis of what you've said about the deferral from the officer, on the basis that it's very unsatisfactory not having any idea how parking is going to be dealt with for the sports fields at this point.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Steptoe, please.
Sorry, Chair, could that question be answered now? Because that might preempt other
Have you got
questions.
that now? Yes. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. The first question I noted was the roof design of phase 1. So if we go to 016, which is, that's the street view. So the question was, from Councillor Stanley, I believe, were there dormers on the front? So basically that is the street view from Rochway. So these 2.5-storey dwellings, they will have their gable elevations facing Rochway. So there'll be windows in the main elevations. This is the garage, and then there's a veranda area with a bedroom here coming onto the veranda. So I also note the point that you made in relation to the land levels. We have a picture of the land levels. If you go to the main slide show again, and there's one labelled there showing land levels. Let's have a look. In the trees. Yeah, there's a frontage from. If you go down here, but I concur. It may well be that one. Yeah. I concur with Councillor Stanley. Is basically, if we go to the site plan, then again, just answer that question briefly. If we go to the existing site plan 002, slide 002. Yeah, so just to answer that question raised, on the north-western corner of the site, basically, if one was standing here, so this is where phase 1 is to be located, and the frontage, those 6 dwellings that you saw along the frontage will be here. There is a differential in land level as far as I can make out. If one was standing in the yard area here, there's a differential of 2.4 metres from the level of the yard area relative to the road level at Rochway. So those properties will be sitting down within the site, if you like. So when you're on Rochway, so if we go to slide street view from Rochway, 14. Yeah, so if one was standing in Rochway, looking at these properties, relative to Rochway, these would be sitting down within the site relative to that area of Rochway opposite them. So that height of, I think it's about 9.10, about 10 metres in height. They're quite high, but the effect of them will be less because of the land level. I think the third question was the spaces that was raised, the parking spaces that were raised. So on plan number scheme layout phase 1 and 2, which is 013. Basically, to answer that question, phase 1, there'll be 1 parking area within the garage and 1 parking area on the drive. So in terms of the parking standards, that would comply with the parking standards for the 14 dwellings. And then there are 31 parking areas within this area here in connection with the use of this phased development. It equates to 0.5 to 0.6 parking spaces per unit. Given the fact that it's a C2 use, as in the use classes order, if one were to look at the parking standards, one would not be able to conclude that that is an inefficient level of parking. So that's the conclusion on that,
Councillor
Chair.
Hoy? Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy with the move to defer the unit, but a couple of points of clarification. The presenter from for the developer mentioned that the access to the Essex disability site would be maintained. I'm unclear from the drawing there as to where that will be. I think that needs to be a little bit more defined. And secondly, the question with regards to with the deferment looking at the parking requirements for the sports field, I'm not sure I heard Councillor Stanley correct. Was he suggesting we needed 2,000 parking spaces? Perhaps I misunderstood what he meant by that. Perhaps I can have some clarification.
Councillor Shaw. Sorry, Councillor Mrs. Hoy. You don't need to stand for me.
Oh, right, okay.
That's just for council.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. The 3 stories, because when you say assisted living, do you mean like there's is that what you mean? There's something wrong with them for assisted living? Is that what you mean? What do you mean by assisted living?
Just a brief description of assisted living, please.
It's covered within the report in terms of the nature of the residential occupation. So, as the agent has indicated, it's basically where someone may need a certain level of care, not to the degree that they would need nursing care, but the planning statement indicates on average 6 hours per week care, where that's just help with minor household tasks. So it's somewhere in between sort of being totally independent in terms of non-assisted and a nursing home. It's that sort of,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
My next question, the three-storey,
Just-
sorry.
Can you just turn your microphone off, please?
Sorry.
The three-storey apartments or whatever, would they have lifts in if it's assisted? Would they automatically have lifts in?
Well, yeah, okay, thank you.
All right. And my further question is, obviously because it's 3 stories high, sort of thing, is there any is there going to be any fire exits? Or
I think
is
I-
there
I-
adequate?
if I can cut in there, what we're looking at here is the principle of the development taking place. The actual technical detail regarding building regulations is outside the decision we're making, but it will comply with it would by law need to comply with the appropriate fire regulations.
Final question is, can you show me a drawing of I don't know if you've got it, the two rooftop terrace outdoor living? Because it says there's 2 rooftop terraces for outdoor living and barbecues, etc. Have you got that on any of your diagrams?
Or can you point where they'd be?
That was the purpose of tonight's presentation isn't to show you every diagram and drawing that we've had. That would be shown on the roof plan that we haven't actually brought with us to the presentation, because it wasn't felt that was material to the consideration of the substantive issues in connection with the application. So I wouldn't be able to show that tonight, Chair. No.
Final one.
All right then. I'd just like to refer you to then Saxon Court, which is over in Rawreth, by Asda's. They built those flats with 3 stories, and there's a rooftop terrace there. But Sanctuary condemned it through health and safety reasons, so they weren't allowed a rooftop terraced sort of thing. So I wonder what the difference is between this one and that one.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Councillor Shaw?
Thank you, Chair. My question is there any provision for social housing in this development?
Yes.
Please.
Go on, quickly.
Yeah. So on the basis of the planning application, it's a 50-50 split. 30 units are for social housing, if I'm correct. That's
Okay.
what's stated in the application. In terms of the rooftop terracing, in terms of the design guidance that's been put forward by Essex Housing, that is a matter for building regulations. Just to address the other question, on the plans, it does show stairwells on the end elevation of buildings for, it has to, as the Chair alluded to, it has to comply with all the regulations on fire, safety, etc. So it's a high standard of design in that respect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hockway.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a number of questions, given the opportunity to ask this with regard to the recommendation. The Spine Road, that's the main feature that runs through the design, is it intended that that is completed in its entirety so that the sports clubs can have proper access to the facilities of the football pitches prior to any major development actually taking place? The other question is how many do we know how many football pitches are actually in the area to the adjacent to the site? Is there any indication as to whether on the actual designated site, is there any facilities going to be on that site to for the sports clubs? Any change in facilities being made available as part of the development? Is there any indication as to any of the parking spaces being allocated for use for the sports clubs to use as part on the actual site? There was mention, I think, at the beginning when there was talk about the land designation as of Greenbelt, and it was mentioned that within the existing building as it is, that the central area is actually classified as Greenbelt within the building. Is that correct?
Okay.
And lastly, the design of the three-storey sort of flats looks very 1960s from the drawings. Is there any attention to with regard to that? Was that an intention of the design, or was that just by accident? Thank you.
I think what we'll do is we'll get the other members to speak, and then we'll come and sum up with the bag of the questions later. It's Councillor Wilson next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a correction, actually. The developer's agent said that Essex County Council Highways were in favour of this scheme, but at 4.10 of the report, we've actually received no response, which is unusual. I'm a big fan of Essex County Council Highways, who always have something to say, but not on this occasion. And that leads me to question 5.63. How did we arrive at the statement that we're content with the transport, highways and accessibility perspective? What evidence have we got from that? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have concerns regarding this proposal. I note that there would be a scooter storage facility. Will the footpaths in Rochford be improved to make the use of an expected increase in the use of these mobility aids? There are to be only 31 parking spaces for 60 units. This is 0.52 spaces per unit. Is that enough? Are those spaces to be oversized so as to make car access easier for residents with disabilities, or are they going to be of normal size? I feel that a three-storey building is totally inappropriate, with balconies overlooking mostly bungalows at the bottom end of Roach Way. This, in my view, is overdevelopment. Do we need this quantity of assisted living accommodation? Would Rochford not be better served with a mix of affordable starter homes, family homes and fewer assisted living units? I note there are to be no affordable family homes on this development. This needs to be addressed. Another concern I have is the parking. I know this area well, and on match days the traffic, even with the car park that's there at the moment, spills over into the roads and it causes absolute congestion. The site was a community asset which was lost without consultation. What would replace it? However, I would support that this site be developed, but feel unable to support this application as to the excessive quantity of assisted living units and the insufficient affordable family homes. I would rather see a rejection to this application rather than a deferral. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mountain.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't really want to repeat points that have already been made by the members, but there are a few things, a few questions that I do have. Again, regarding point 4.10, Essex County Council Highways, no response received. As members, it's sort of advisory. What's the position on that? If we were to raise objections based on knowledge of the area, if we haven't received a response from Essex County Highways, that's quite unusual. Normally, they do have something to say on the matter, and I'm interested to know how we respond to them not responding. It was mentioned about airport noise, especially on takeoff, and I understand from the previous speaker that was related to one of the reasons why the previous facility with the college, the school, closed down. I haven't heard any response into the noise pollution issue. And looking at what's on the screen at the moment, I've got to just say I think it looks really ugly. And, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, etc. But it looks more like a 1960s office development than a domestic. It is. It's awful. Sorry. It's in my opinion, it's aesthetically unattractive, and I wondered that if it was to be refused, or even if it was to be deferred, that possibly we could encourage the developers to go back to the drawing board and come up with something more aesthetic for our residents and our district. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just come to you in a minute, Councillor Black. I felt the design was something of an elephant in the room, and I'm glad you mentioned it. We had mentioned that earlier on that there was something of an amount of heritage to the existing building, and then the officers were talking about the design guides and notes that could be taken from the residential housing that was around. I feel that perhaps the design does need to reflect back to some of the design notes that can be found in the existing building as opposed to the existing residential. I'd consider that the designs that are in front of us to be exceptionally urban, and we're not in an exceptionally urban area. We're in an area that abuts Greenfield, and on the screen at the moment, the very bottom flank, I believe, is what you would see from the Greenfield looking in, and I don't feel that is appropriate. Councillor Black, if you'd like to speak now, and then I'll come back with a little bit more.
Thank you, Chairman. A lot of good points have been made. I don't think it's quite as awful as the 1960s. I don't think we'll ever get to that nadir of development ever again. Having said that, I think you've summed up, Chairman, pretty well, but it does seem very urban, and it is in the green belt and the edge of Greenland, and I think that's a mark against it. And I can understand why members are considering voting, moving refusal, but I don't think we've had a motion yet, and we need to have definite reasons. I am intrigued by County Highways not responding. I'm not always as big a fan of them as my colleague here is. However, we've had a holding objection from Sport England. They always seem to do holding objections. They've actually seemed to reply straight out with a refusal or a straight out objection. I'm only wondering whether it's worth waiting for clarification from Sport England so that we can add it into the refusal. On the other hand, we have got a holding objection. It is an objection, and maybe if members were minded to refuse, then that could still be added in as a reason for doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, in the discussion we've had, there's a good number of points that have been raised where further information is required, and in particular we've got a holding decision, as Councillor Bax just explained, from Sport England, and an officer recommendation for deferment. I feel that if I were to list out all the particular areas that I've noted as we've been speaking, and this item were to then be deferred, it could come back to us with a further clearer picture on what we're talking about. So if I could go through what I've picked up, where I believe we need further information to help us make us a more informed decision. So in the first instance, we have the parking for when the sports field is being used. There's clearly a lack of clarity over that and how that will be handled. The amount of parking on site, we do have some definitive numbers, but we have questions about the size of the spaces given some of the issues that some of the residents might have. there is shown an access road to the disability site, but the method of the transition and any contact between that site and exactly how that would work is not clear enough for us. We have a question about the outdoor living space and the clarity about the use there and how that might impact on the other residents. We need some clarity with regard to the phasing of the road, when that would go in, how the different phases of the site would be created. There are questions about community contribution towards facilities and sports facilities that we don't have the answer to at the moment. We have Essex Highways, where members have specifically requested a little bit more clarity. I must admit, though, if Essex Highways don't put a contribution forward, then it normally means they're content. We have questions about mobility scooters and the parking of those, given that we've got the issues around mobility and living restrictions of some of the residents, then that's a clear and fair question. The issue of aircraft is their noise, the flight paths. We want a little bit more clarity in that, although it's not considered a significant issue. And then the design issue, the exceptional urban presentation of the design. Again, on the screen in front of you, you see the full flank presentation of the houses, which would be going on to Roachway. So members, I will put it to you that we need more clarity on all of those issues. Officers have specifically requested time to get clarity from Sport England and how they want to produce. I think the item needs more work, and because we've had the opportunity to discuss all these things, raise all these issues, I believe that if this was to come back to us, we would be in a better position to make a decision for approval or rejection, as the case may be. So from the chair, I will move that this item is deferred. Thank you. I just want to make sure, though, just before we go to a vote, are there any new issues regarding this that you wish to raise so that we can have the clarity on a future decision? Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just get some clarity on the visitor spaces for the 14 houses? According to item 5.61, there's 2 visitor spaces for the 14 houses.
Can we add that to the list of clarity that we need? Thank you. Councillor Hookway.
Yeah, I don't think this is one of my issues, but I think it was Councillor Williams brought it up in relation to the mix of affordable housing, the fact that there seemed to be a lack of affordable family dwellings. I just wondered if that could be added to the list as well.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Merrick.
Thank you, Chairman. No doubt I'll be corrected if I'm incorrect, but there seems to be an inconsistency. Paragraph 4.15 says, for the lead local flood authority, we do not object to granting a planning permission subject to the following conditions, and it then sets out the various conditions. And in paragraph 4.19, it says, if you are minded to approve the application contrary to this advice, which seems to be inconsistent with the previous paragraph, we request that you contact us to allow further discussion and or representations from us. And I'm wondering whether there have been any contact and any further discussions or representations.
Right. So, an anomaly there. Do you want to just answer that one?
Chairman, forgive me. we've had that from time to time where I think it's the victim of cut and paste from previous replies, and they do us a reply and then leave a tail of something from another application. So I take it the point with the inconsistency, but that's probably an error on their part. They're clearly raising no objection.
Right. I think if we're deferring, we'll come back to this on another occasion. So, those members in favour of deferring this item, please indicate. Those against? Thank you. That item is deferred. Thank you. Got some work to do on that one. Right. Our next item is item 8. Coming back to 7 in a short while. This is 8 Harrow Close, Hawkwell, an outbuilding to use as a playhouse. Who's doing this one? Oh, right. Rob's doing this.
The application relates to this house here on the corner of Harrow Close.
Can we do the microphone? With the yeah. Just try again once more.
This application.
That's it.
This application relates to this house on the corner of Harrow Close. It's on the eastern side of the Hawkwell residential area and has a backing onto the Metropolitan Greenbelt, as you can see here. The application is related to is reported to committee as the applicant is related to a member of the RDC staff. The building, which has already been largely completed, lies very close to the boundary of 65 Park Gardens, which has a garden shed close to the shared boundary. As you can see there, this is the building itself. The outbuilding would be about 15 metres from the rear conservatory of this neighbour. Right. The playhouse, when completed, would be 4 metres high with a floor area of 7.7 square metres, a maximum length of 5.2 metres and a width of 2.8 metres. The building would contain a mezzanine floor above the ground floor area of about 1.5 square metres for storage purposes and would be constructed in rendered block work with timber cladding and a pitched felt roof. The building would have 5 sides to it and fits in the corner of the garden, set back about 0.2 metres from the site boundary. As you can see from this, there would be windows at ground and first floor level facing back towards the application property, but no windows in any of the other elevations facing towards the site boundaries. The building is within proximity of an area of woodland subject to a tree protection order, although the closest trees are a minimum of about 5 metres from the actual building itself. Given that the building is largely constructed and is without substantial foundations, the Council's Woodlands Officer does not recommend any conditions or have any concerns about development itself. Officers consider that the proximity of this outbuilding close to the boundary with neighbouring properties would materially impact on the visual amenities of the occupiers, with the building appearing visually intrusive and dominant within the rear garden environment. In the conclusion of the committee report, the officer stated that an acceptable form of development could be achieved if the mezzanine floor is removed and the roof height lowered. I would also state that permitted development rights would allow for an outbuilding located more than 2 metres from the site boundary to be a height of 4 metres with a dual pitch roof, or 3 metres in the case of other roof form. So if this building was located elsewhere on the site and had a slightly reduced height, it probably would be permitted development. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a speaker on this one, Mr. Peter Bliss, on behalf of the applicant. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
5 minutes. I'll let you know when you've got a minute to go.
Thanks very much. Good evening, Chair, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be brief. This proposal, as you can see, is 3/4 built. I speak on behalf of my son, Stephen Bliss. He's a resident and owner of 8 Harrow Close. With regards to the playhouse, Mr. Bliss has apologised previously for his mistake. He thought he was building it under permitted development. He knew that he could build up to 4 metres high with a pitched roof, but he hadn't picked up that he'd have to be less than 2 metres from the boundary. That was the problem that he's had, and so he carried on with the building, and he advised all of his neighbours of what he was doing. During and prior to construction, he discussed many times with his neighbours the product or the project. All were encouraging, including the lady at number 65 Park Gardens. Mr. Bliss hopes to build a playhouse that complements the natural wooded surrounding of the site with sympathetic finish and materials. He didn't want to buy a plastic playhouse, he wanted to buy something that blended in, and he's tried to do it with an imaginative design. The costs of the construction and the time taken have been prohibitive in comparison with the purpose-built plan. Although he thought he could build it within PD, Mr. Bliss, or my son, has constructed the roof to reduce the height at the fence with number 65. So at the actual fence, at the back end of this building, it has a hip, it's a hip-ended roof. So although it's a 4 metre pitched roof from the front, at the actual joining with the fence of the people, of the lady who is objecting to it, the height is actually 2.3, with the roof sloping away at 45 degrees to join the 4 metre ridge, which is away from the fence. Considering this, Mr. Bliss was most surprised to hear of the objection from number 65. Number 7A, I believe, has objected on behalf of 65, as the boundary with number 7A is way away from this proposal. Viewed from the conservatory at number 65, the playhouse is behind a garden shed and a large ash tree on the site of 65, to the left side of a large garden. The playhouse, as has been said, is approximately 50 feet from the conservatory. Mr. Bliss is happy to provide growing evergreen foliage to the roof facing 65, or whatever is deemed adequate to shield the structure, and to remove the mezzanine floor. In conclusion, Mr. Bliss does not want to upset his neighbour and hopes that agreement can be reached and that some flexibility will be viewed with this proposal and that it may be passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Steptoe, it's indicated so.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit, my first reaction on seeing it, I thought it was perhaps of a better designed building than the previous application, and would have fitted far better in the semi-rural setting of Roachway. If this was to be passed, I would like to see a condition limiting the use of this particular building, so it doesn't become some sort of granny annex or similar, because it's a fairly substantial building there. Thank you.
Members, the recommendation is for refusal on this one. We've had it indicated to us, though, that at a later stage something very similar could be built, but not in this location. But this one doesn't fall within permitted development rights. We've had a presentation from the officers. So, members, the recommendation for refusal is on the paper. Can I have those members? Sorry.
Can I just add to that a little bit, that if there is moved to another position in the site, that again, it's not used, or a condition is put on that it can't be used for any form of granny annex or similar?
Don't think we can do that if it's permitted development rights.
Sure.
Yeah.
You couldn't do it.
No, we couldn't do it. So, members, those members in favour of the refusal, please indicate. Sorry, got it properly. Okay. Thank you. That's unanimous. That item is refused. We're back to item 7 now. (289) Ferry Road, Holmbridge. Demolish existing dwelling and construct part 2-storey, part 3-storey building to comprise of 10 2-bedroom and 2 3-bedroom flats. There's been a site visit to this one. Members, I think, will be informed anyway, but the plans have been amended slightly since that visit, and there's clear information about those changes in the addendum, but we'll have our report first, if we could please.
Planning permission is sought to demolish a dwelling and erect a building to provide 12 flats, 10 2-bedroom flats and 2 3-bedroom flats. The site relates to this building here. It's located at the northern end of Ferry Road, on the western side opposite the turnaround for the buses and the public car park. The area is characterised by modest dwellings set in deep plots, but with generally consistent building line. The site backs onto the Kendall Park Nature Reserve, and some members may be aware that there is actually a badger set in the woodlands just to the rear there. The site is located between River Breeze Court, a previously developed site which is now apartments. This was permitted about 10 years ago. To the north of the site is a smaller detached dwelling with pitched roof front dormers like that. The site area is 0.22 hectares and has a frontage onto Ferry Road of 29.6 metres and a depth of 75.5 metres. The principle for the redevelopment of this site has been well established over the past 20 years. In 2007, the council permitted development of 14 flats. In 2008, development of 17 flats was permitted on the site, but neither of these were actually built out. Members may recall from the November 2016 Planning Committee, an application of 14 flats was refused due to its bulk and massing. Bear with me a moment. These are the plans for the refusal of 2016. It's quite a substantial building that was refused. Basically, it's taken a 3-storey form. It's very wide. It doesn't seem to fit in very well with either of the buildings either side. Council are informed that in an earlier appeal decision for a 2005 application, the inspector agreed that a redevelopment of the site with flats would be appropriate for this location, given its sustainable credentials and the varied form of surrounding development. The inspector stated that whilst a 3-storey building would not be appropriate, a 3-storey element incorporating accommodation within the roof void would be acceptable. This is an elevation plan of the proposed building, and it's substantially different from what was before, as you just noticed. The building will be set back from the highway and broadly in line with the existing pattern of development either side and further down Ferry Road. The design would incorporate a variety of forms, including gable projections, dormers and a stepped roof height in order to blend in with developments either side. The heights of the building itself vary between 6.6 and 9 metres, and that corresponds as the higher part of the flats next door and the lower height of the detached dwelling to the north. There will be a mix of different materials, including brickwork, render and tiles, to encompass some of the materials in the surrounding development. The staggered articulation, different forms and materials bring a degree of interest and variety to the design. It is considered that the design and scale would not be over-dominant or incongruous within the street scene. Since the members' site visit, there's been an amendment to the site layout, and the applicant has submitted a revised site plan with changes to the areas of hard and soft landscaping. The revised site plan makes the following changes: an increase in the number of parking spaces from 20 spaces to 24 spaces, with 20 spaces provided to the front of the site and 4 spaces to the rear. All parking spaces meet the preferred base size of 5.5 by 2.9 metres. With the spaces to the rear, the four parking spaces would have grasscrete surfaces. The cycle parking and the bin store will be relocated from the front to the rear of the building. Just over here, around here. There would also be a reduction in the size of the private garden areas to the ground floor flats A, B, C and D. And there will be an increase in the rear communal area from 403 to 555 square metres. This size exceeds the requirement for shared space for flatted developments, which is 300 square metres for a 12 flatted development. So basically you've got more than twice the amenity area for the flats than what would be required. The occupier of 293 Ferry Road had concerns about the use of the rear gardens of such sites for parking areas, and this revised plan has reduced the level provision to the rear. Officers consider that proposal is a significant improvement on the previously refused scheme, and the recommendation is therefore for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got two speakers on this one. Councillor Eddie Smith on British Parish Council.
5 minutes, I'll let you know when you've got a minute to go.
I'll be very short. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Parish Council have considered the application, and although we have not objected to it in principle, we are concerned that the applicant has stated that the residents can park in the Pauls Lane car park, as the application has insufficient spaces for the amount of flats planned. We would like to highlight to this committee that Pauls Lane car park is managed by the Parish Council, and it has no overall parking order, which gives the Parish Council the power to move or have moved any vehicle which breaches this order. Our own maintenance staff monitor the car park, and we have previously moved a car and at times have closed the car park due to events. On another matter, the site backs onto Kendall Park Nature Reserve, which is home to a very large badger colony. The colony is just the other side of the fence of the site, and there are a number of entrances and exits, and suspect that their tunnels are also under the rear of the garden. We know the current owner has spoken to Essex Barrage Trust due to the badgers going into their garden. We are concerned that if this application is passed, that heavy vehicles and machinery could disturb the colony set. We have to abide by strict guidelines if we do any coppicing work near to the sets in the reserve. That's all we have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have Miss Elsa Hampston, who's the agent on this one.
Good evening, Chairman, members. Thank you for your time in coming to the site and considering this application. I'm sure you're all aware that there's been extensive planning history at this site, which is outlined in Section 3 of the Officer's report. This includes 4 previous planning approvals for the demolition of the existing dwelling and the replacement with the development of flats. It's highlighted that all these permissions granted were actually for a more intensified form of development than now proposed, which is only seeking 12 flats. The principle of this form of development has therefore already been established. The more recent application, as mentioned by the officer, was refused based on bulk scale, and it was considered to be a cramped form of development. The applicant's really taken on board the concerns raised by members previously and the officer, and has proactively worked with the council to prepare a scheme which would receive a favourable recommendation. I'm pleased to say that this has now been achieved. This proactive approach included having pre-application meetings with the council officers and also Essex County Council Design Officer Peter Dawson, who supports the proposal, to create a design which is considered to comply with relevant policies and provide a positive contribution to the area. As outlined in the officer's report, excuse me, the design respects the building line of the adjacent residential development. So on the one side, it's staggered at the highest point with the adjacent flats and then reduced down to reflect the 1.5-storey chalet on the opposite side. This staggered design also adds visual interest, provides articulation, and would be in keeping with the context of the street scene as the land naturally slopes downwards. In addition, the width of the building has been reduced and moved further away from the number 293, following concerns about the impact of the occupier on this dwelling. The overall bulk's been reduced. This, together with the increased separation distance and the significantly lower ridge height, ensures that no over-dominance would occur. The planning officer agrees with this when assessing the proposal against relevant policy. Parking, as we know, has always been an issue at this development. Originally, we submitted 20 parking spaces, which, given the sustainability of the area, was considered both by ourselves and the officer to be sufficient. However, following the meeting, I understand that members wanted to still see some additional parking space. So you'll have seen the site plan tonight amended so that now each unit would have 2 parking spaces each, meeting the current standards. The majority of the spaces, again, are also at the front of the site to protect the amenities of number 293, with only 4 now at the rear. I trust this now overcomes the issues relating to the parking. No objections have been raised from any professional third-party consultee. The applicants have provided sufficient reports and supporting documents to satisfy the Parish Council, the Highway Authority, Natural England and the Environmental Department, and indeed the Planning Officer, who's now recommending approval. Planning policy stresses the importance of making an efficient and effective use of land in sustainable locations. The application before you achieves this and provides a high-quality modern design which makes a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the area. It would provide sustainably constructed flats to meet the needs of current and future generations, thus contributing to the shortage of housing in the district. I just wanted to quickly touch on the points you raised. Obviously, the parking in this application was never seeking to utilise the car park across the road. The whole intention was to make sure that we provided in this location, where obviously you can walk to things and the bus services, at least now 2 spaces per unit, which is considered sufficient. And in terms of the Badger, obviously a secondary report was carried out. We're aware of where the Badger set's located, and the applicants are fully agreeable to the terms and the mitigation in terms of not using machinery to dig down within that 30-metre zone from the Badger set. On this basis, I ask members to therefore agree with the Council's recommendation and grant planning permission subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our visiting members first. Councillor Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. I will be fairly brief. I'll just point out there was just a couple of problems I had with the presentation by the officer. I understand there were 4 reasons for refusal at the meeting for the previous application. 2 were recommended, and I think 2 were added later at the meeting itself, one of which was on the parking standard. With regard to the parking now is for 24 spaces, which agrees to our standard for the actual flats. It still falls short by 3 visitor spaces. However, I think the applicant has worked very hard to actually get 24 in there in the end, and given that the property to the south, the flats to the south of this property only have no visitor spaces themselves. They have 8 spaces for 4 2-bedroom flats. That I think is probably acceptable now. I can see from the report that and from the plans that we've been shown that the original scheme for the parking spaces to be nearer the fence line and nearer the Badger sets has now actually increased the space between the 2, and I think that's beneficial as well. And I'd just like to thank the applicant for making such a good effort. I think the building and the design is far superior to the one originally put.
Thank you. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. Having looked at the site, and we went to the site meeting, it became apparent that obviously the Badger set and what have you, and we discussed that would be cordoned off so that would no be interruption to the Badger set. So we're pleased about that. Also, the parking, they've really worked hard on getting this done, and I'm pleased to see that there are two parking spaces per unit. I would like, if we could, put some sort of recommendation in as to next door has got a footpath in front of it, and I wonder if the developer would like to continue with that footpath to make it more accessible for visitors to the property, as they can get out of the car and get onto the footpath rather than onto the driveway of the property, which would be a good idea. Also, if there are visitors, I'm sure that they will use the car park that's available to them as visitors. Whatever time they come, I don't know what time it closes, but I'm sure they'll remove their cars before the car park closes in any case. On that episode, I think it's a well thought out plan, and I'm pleased to see the amendments to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remember when this came up before the committee before, it was a whole combination of reasons why this shouldn't be approved. And I'm pleased to say that the car parking has been improved. The fact that it's not reliant on the Pauls Lane car park, as Councillor Smith said. The only thing is for consistency. One of the points that I raised was that the report said that there was good transport links. And that hasn't actually changed. So it doesn't mean that I'm against this. All I would say is that if you want to come to Holbridge after 11 o'clock at night on the bus, you can't do it. And if you want to get out of the village, it's difficult. So just for consistency, the bus situation hasn't changed. It's the same frequency.
Thank you. Members, we've got a recommendation for refusal. Sorry, beg your pardon. Go, you can carry away there. A recommendation for approval. We've got the various conditions stated on pages 7, 10, 11, 12 and 13. Those Councillor Mrs Hoy.
Can we insist that they put the footpath in? No?
We've got the plan that's in front of us that we're determining.
Right, okay, then, that's fine.
Obviously, the applicants are here and they've heard what's been said.
No, that's fine.
Okay. So those members in favour of the approval, please indicate. Thank you. That's unanimous. That's approved. And our last one tonight is item 9. Which is the old pumping station, Fambridge Road, South Fambridge.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. If we can stick out, Rob, on the large scale, there's a reason for that, Chairman. The site is just about here somewhere. We'll zoom in and it's better for members to see. But the point being, while we're out this far, is to be able to show members the sporadic nature of the area, because that's why we're recommending differently to what you might normally expect. You'll see Blenheim Farm up here, South Fambridge Hall here, the Church of St Mary's and a couple of cottages there. Now, to help members, you can zoom in on that image, please, Rob. Members will see that the site's about 290 metres or so from Ashington Road Junction, Fambridge Road, and it's an awkward triangular-shaped, odd piece of land that has, I think, legacy back to the water company. On the site, there's a brick-built small structure, I think about 6 metres by 4 or so in size. It's a very small structure with a hip roof. The point being, there's hardly anything there. There's a footpath you see along that edge to the, it connects from the bend in the road out to the other side, but there's also treed margins or hedgerows along this side, but it's grassed, just a lone solitary brick pump shed, just a very small building. If we could just zoom out a touch then, please, Rob. The site area is 0.4 of a hectare, and that's relevant for later on because your standards to deal with stables, which this application is about, normally require just this amount for one stable. And that's pertinent to the point that we come on to. If we can see the layout of the site now, please, Rob. Members will see that this application is unusual because it more or less covers particularly the front part of the site with built form. You'll see hard surfacing. The access, the site is very narrow, about 6 metres wide here, widening to 50 odd at the back. But you'll see the applicant proposes to put in a roadway, a turning area, build 7 stables, use the brick building that we have on the site as a tack room and feed store, and build a little toilet for staff and sort of like a restroom on the back. There's one of those rotary horse walkers, and we see the elevations in a touch, plus a storage building with a sort of road scalpings area. So you've got built form, You've got a different built form there. You've got the surfacing and then a small turnout area at the back. Now, the nature of these stables, unlike those that you normally get, this is put forward as a sort of a rehabilitation area for racehorses. So they wouldn't be looking for the normally extensive grazing that you would expect with your policy. They would be resting. They need some limited turnout, but they don't want the extensive acreage that we normally see. Now, the problem we have, if we can go just through the elevations quickly, Rob, just give members a view of it. They're mostly about 4 or 5 metres high, but here's the stable building. You typically see that. It's of good traditional design. If we flip to the other elevations, please, you'll see that it's got a brick plinth at ground floor. Nice combination with the weatherboarding finish. If you go on to elevations, there's a button, Rob, 1 to 5. If we be on 2, yeah, they drop down at the top, hopefully, yeah, see at the top? Oh, that's it. Traditional stable building that you've approved many times in the green belt. Brick plinth to the lower part, weatherboarding to the sides, and metal sheeting to the top. If we jump to the next one, please, Rob. This is the storage building, open on one side and clad in the others. A grey sheeting to the roof and green cladding to the sides. Again, what you've approved perhaps many times. If we can then have a look at the next elevation, you'll see this is the horse walker. It's a rotary. You put, I think, 6 horses potentially, and they walk round, and then you turn them around the other way and walk around the other side so they don't build muscles up too much on one side. It's an exercise machine. It's a good substitute for the lack of grazing, but that's not our concern in this application. If we can jump back to the layout, please, Rob. This site is located in the green belt, but also the coastal protection belt. When we looked at the aerial view over the site before, we saw the vast tracts of hedged fields, small pockets of pasture. There was, in my view, not much else in the landscape. It's a fairly empty landscape. Now, this kind of activity here, stabling, is permissible in the green belt. The green belt allows it to be used for recreational purposes, which this would be, but there's a caveat to that policy. It says that it must preserve openness. Okay? Now, usually what happens is we have a planning application for an area like this, perhaps with another 6 hectares of land. So for forsaking a small part of a site, the grazing that's always required necessitates the bulk of the site left open. If you think of the football pitch applications we get perhaps a pavilion or particularly containers, but that might be serving several pitches. So the pitches that the containers facilitate keep the remainder of the size of the site open. This application is not like that. This is different. This requires a more intense development on a very small site, which doesn't then satisfy the test of maintaining openness, because the bulk of the site, although it's a very small site, is dominated by all the built form, and that makes it different to all the applications that you've approved in the past with no trouble. This site is also previously developed land because of the legacy from the water company and the pump house, and the caveat is the same. The comparison must be made to the size of the existing building. Now, you saw in the aerial view that the brick house is a very small, simple building. If you then look at the size of the stables on here, plus the outbuilding, the horse walker, all added built form way in excess of that. If members are familiar with the Bulwood Hall application, they'll remember we was comparing the size of the prison buildings to the housing development and scale on that. It was a comparison between built forms. That's what you have to do with the previously developed land. Here, it's quite a simple test in officer's view. We have a brick building with a simple roof and then a very much larger extensions proposed. This is why officers are recommending the way we are. It's not probably what you might typically expect, but hopefully members can gauge from what I've said, this is why we recommend refusal. Now, on the addendum, members will see that since preparing the report, although on this one the Environment Agency do not object, their colleagues at the lead local flood authority, Essex County Council, have considered the flood risk assessment. Because this is in a Zone 3 area, which is the area more susceptible to flooding, the applicants have submitted an assessment. Now, that assessment is weak in the lead flood authority's view on some of the calculations. So we've heard it earlier this evening on another matter. A holding objection has been put in. and before the lead flood authority could sign it off, as it were, and say that it's acceptable, they would require those extra calculations. The position is with this, Chairman, is because it's in the Green Belt and the Coastal Protection Belt, as you'll see in the report, whether the application was able to achieve the flood resilience or not, which is probably technically possible, it doesn't undo the Green Belt harm that officers are concerned about. So the recommendation in this case, Chairman, is refusal for the reasons set out on the report before you, but also the second reason you'll see at the end of the addendum relating to the flood issue.
Thank you. One speaker on this, Mr. Keith Worth, who's the planning agent.
Is it on?
5 minutes, I'll let you know when you've got a minute to go.
Okay. Right. Good evening, Chairman, members. Thank you for some time. This proposal is for a small private stable yard, and the intention is for horses that are owned by the applicant. The original officer recommendation was purely on Greenbelt issues, but I note tonight, belatedly, the issue of drainage has been added as a reason for refusal. As your officers rightly say, Greenbelt policy is to be commended, and its main purpose is to prevent urban sprawl. But by definition, Greenbelt should be open. I would go on to say later on that horsey type things always need paddock land to some degree because of grazing, so they will always be in the countryside. They wouldn't be in a built-up area where one couldn't afford that sort of land. In your planning officer's report, in clause 10, he states that this type of use is appropriate in the Greenbelt, and that's been reiterated by your planning officer. However, in clause 11, he states there will still be significant development compared to existing. Well, there's a pump house on site at the moment, which is relatively small, but the whole development, in my view, you may have a different view, but in my view, is quite small. We have tried to keep the existing pump house, and we've treated it elevationally slightly different to the new build, so that there is some historical context. People realise what it was there for originally. The site is brownfield, and the government strongly recommend that brownfield sites be used where at all possible. We are trying to do that with this particular site. We go on, if we couldn't have equestrian development in the Greenbelt, well, there would be very few around London, of course, with such a large metropolitan Greenbelt. If I can go on to the flood risk assessment, the land in question is very flat, but unlike a commercial, industrial or residential development, it doesn't really matter if flooding occurs in a stable. In fact, stables are quite often wet on the inside when the horse pees. So flooding, in my view, should not be a big issue. And lastly, when we talk about horses, they are very much more, there's a lot more time required for a horse than for many other types of use. And it's not just the person handling the horse, there's an indirect spin-off to farriers, feedstuffs, vets, tack. So it actually is very good for the rural economy as well. So although there's a recommendation for refusal on Greenbelt grounds, I would suggest equestrian is strongly supported by government in the Greenbelt. And if drainage is an issue, well, there is a case, I think earlier on was suggested it could be deferred if you want more information on drainage. But from my point of view, having done literally hundreds of stables in the UK, getting damp inside a stable is not a risk that it would be in a commercial, industrial or residential property. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. This item's been referred to us by Councillor Gooding, so would you like to speak first?
Thank you, Chair. Although this application is not within the Hawker West ward, which is where I represent, I was contacted by the applicant and asked if I knew why there was this suggested refusal. There seemed to be some confusion at the time with the green belt and the brown field area, so that is why I took it upon myself to take a further look at the area. It is, as already noted, a previous development on the site, and when I looked at the green belt area, it's 2 miles away from the water's edge, which was a lot further than I thought it was from the report. And I noted there's many more housing around the water's edge, so I felt that that argument was not stacking up in my view. There was also a time limit when this was brought to my attention, with a matter of a couple of hours before the deadline. So I brought it to the attention for members to have a look at before it was just totally refused out of hand.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe the pump house was put on there some time ago, and it was always deemed as green belt in that region. There are several concerns that I'd like to bring to your attention. Is that stabling that many horses will actually need transport to and from the site, as well as the feed that they'll need, and the amount of water that they have to wash a horse down with is just unbelievable. It can take 2 or 3 hours just to clean their legs once they get out in the stables. Once they get out of the stables, so I know friends of mine that have got horses, and it does take a long time. But getting away from that,
focus on pure planning issues.
Getting away
not
from that
washing
on
horses'
planning
legs,
issue,
please.
I'm just on planning issue alone. There'll be it's quite flat land, and it'll hold an awful lot of water. So and there's no high land there at all anywhere. On the stable issue, that many horses will need an awful lot of feed on site, and there's not enough room for that many. It doesn't look like many room for that many cars to park there with stable lads and vets and lorries coming and going sort of thing. So I don't think it's large enough for that. Thank you.
If I may come out, just to be clear for members, officers have no objection to the design and layout of the scheme. This is a good scheme, gets the vehicles in off the road, there's a turn-in facility, there's ramps to unload, there's good storage and things like that. The concern is the amount of footprint on such a small plot, which hits that definition to green belt we spoke of earlier about it not maintaining openness. If this had been the same site with several hectares of land way off the plan, I don't think you'd be discussing this. This is an intense concentration on a small plot. To help the applicant with the flood risk, it's not about the horses being at damage or risk through flooding. The ground sloping the way it is with the village on high ground, the Environment Agency say as it comes back on this scale into the site, into the low-lying area, there would be a risk of flooding or surface water catchment, given all the hard surfaces, tipping into the network, causing flooding downstream. So it's a calculation. Imagine if all the hard surfaces and buildings are like an umbrella, catching the rainwater, putting it into the system. The issue is about that. It's not about the threat to the horses or the facility. It's a technical issue to do with capacity, which is why I think the Lead Flood Authority think they can fix it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. On that basis, members, when you're speaking, if you could attempt to focus what you say onto those 2 issues. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, picking up sort of on that theme. Obviously, this is, for want of a better word, is an intense care unit for horses. Now, there's obviously going to have to be staff there working. What facilities, i.e. toilet facilities and things, are in place for those workers? I haven't seen anything as of yet. I'm pretty certain that it's unlikely to be onto main drainage. So where will the effluent from that side of things be dealt with? Having worked with a lot of horses over many years, yes, I am aware of the amount of, shall we call it, effluent that horses can produce over a given period of time. How is that going to be dealt with running into the watercourse? And in particular, there are other stables near me where, when we gave planning permission for them, we didn't tighten up on the way that the disposal of the waste, the muck and the stuff that comes out of the stables. And currently I've got a set of stables where the actual pile of muck next to it is actually bigger than the stables. So I would like to see some sort of control put in place, if it is passed, that makes sure that that is taken away from the site on a very regular basis.
Thank you. Councillor Mountain.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm completely in agreement with what the officer has said in terms of the intensity on a small area of land, that if it was larger, then it could be moved for approval. But I'm completely in support of a refusal on this application that we have in front of us. I do have a question based on a personal interest, I suppose, in animal welfare as much as anything, that when we have an application of this nature, is it possible to get reports from animal welfare, RSPCA, for example, in terms of their viewpoint on whether that would be an appropriate development for animals to live in, with flood risk and everything considered that we've heard tonight? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Newport. Oh, just let you sum up at the end.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to disagree with the officer about animal welfare in this case, because I don't think we could put a condition on the stables only being able to house ex-race horses for rehabilitation, and the amount of grazing there I don't feel is sufficient, and it wouldn't meet British Horse Society standards. So I'll support refusal.
Councillor Black.
I'm quite pleased Mr. called in. He's given us a chance to look at policies in the coastal protection belt. But I support the recommendation for refusal. It's quite clear. It's contrary to GB1 and ENV2. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hookway.
Just for clarity, I believe the officer mentioned that the area is flood zone free. So if this had been a residential application, it's highly likely it wouldn't have got off the starting blocks. Just because it's housing equines, I think we also need to consider their welfare, and it would seem that there's, as Councillor Newport has pointed out, there's no conditional guarantee that we can put on as to what type of equine horses are housed here, and it could be used for other purposes down the line, and there would be insufficient grazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a similar refusal last year, I believe, for in Holbridge Road. And the animal welfare does come in the British Horse Society standards, and the number of hectares. I can't remember off the top of my head how much it is per horse. But that does form part of our policy documentation, animal welfare in the countryside. The question I've got is, how big is the turnout area? And from the British Horse Society standards, managing that turnout area is actually key, because you've got to clean it up, obviously, through the year and maintain it. So that is the question I've got. Thank you.
Chairman, taking that point last, I don't have a figure for you for the area of the turnout, but I do know that the area of the site as a whole is 0.4 of a hectare. I mentioned that in the opening. So the whole site that you see would be the grazing area for one horse, one box. Now, the grazing isn't for feed, it's as much for exercise. In actual fact, you can overgraze a horse, you can feed it too much grass, it gets laminitis, etc., and becomes ill and can't stand up and all those sort of things. It's as much for recreation, which is why we sometimes lower the standard where they're near the bridleway network. So where they can relieve the pasture from trampling and duration by working on unmade roads or the bridleway network, etc. Now, this area you'll see as a proportion of 0.4 is what, roughly a quarter maybe a third. So if I suggested a third of 0.4 of a hectare and the standard for one horse box is 0.4, this is about a third equivalent to one horse box. On the point of welfare that was raised, these boxes are to the size advocated by the British Horse Society, normally about 3 metres by 3 metres. It can vary on a horse. If you've got big sort of 17-hand horse or something like that, and obviously you need a bigger stable. If you've got Shetlands and smaller horses, then you need it proportionally. But these would suit just about, I think, the standard required by the British Horse Society for the horses that are being talked about. The members asked about welfare. I understand the sentiment, but from a planning point of view, we're dealing with the relationship with buildings, the impacts in the landscape. The welfare issues are dealt with by the RSPCA and other bodies, and the owners, if they've got racehorses and things like this, they're likely to be, they're investments as much as pets. I don't think you're going to be looking at a welfare issue from the point of view of the development itself. As I said, this is a good scheme. It's just that it's too much on the site in green belt terms. If this had been several hectares, I don't think we'd be having those conversations. But the amount of grazing, because of the nature of the work here, they don't need a lot of turnout as they become injured again. This is a rehab where they would build up to then go away to wherever they're stable permanently. And there's a point raised, I think, about whether anybody's resident on the site. There isn't. There's a small sort of staff room, if you call it that, with a toilet in there and say, a kitchenette. That's not unusual on yards where farriers and people come and they leave dockets for bills and things like this. There is, I believe, it's not on this plan, but I think in my view of the application, there was some kind of sewage facility for the limited toilet facilities that are on the site. The member is right that we can, if members are minded to grant permission, you can have a condition where you put on a muck away regime, as it were, so that the applicant would be, by condition, required to agree details for the transport way of the waste, and then that could be enforced against because it was a condition if it was found to not be exercised. I think that's covered the questions, Chairman.
There's a question from Councillor Black.
On from your explanation, Mr. Strengths, I understand what you're saying, that because there's no surrounding hectares of grazing land, this is unacceptable in terms of greenbelt policy because it's a built-up area there. It's also in the coastal protection zone belt, and I just wondered how much extra weight that places on the situation.
Chairman, I've probably been light on that, but you'll see from the report that it effectively doubles up. The idea of the coastal landscape, although I'd probably suggest a little bit more difficult in this location. I don't think go to the aerial photograph, Rob. The land inclines from this point. If we can zoom out a bit, this area here is high ground, and the river itself. If you can go out a little bit more, so we can see the river, please, Rob. Well, perhaps that'll do. Our site is about here, and the sort of the relief of the land runs through here and drops down. So you can't see the coast from this point. But the point being that development in this area should be largely restricted so that it keeps its sort of undeveloped nature and the enjoyment of the river as a leisure resource. So we're not at issue with the way that the belt has been drawn. The belt has been drawn way back up here somewhere, so it captures all these areas in there. This site is within the coastal protection belt. It has the impacts that are set out in the report, which are similar to Greenbelt. But the main issue here is that the test that the government requires, if you're to allow leisure uses or uses in the green belt, that's okay, providing they preserve openness. And why we like stables normally is that you get, for the cost of a small development in the corner of a field somewhere, because of the grazing requirements, etc., by definition, the rest of the site has to be kept open. The reverse of that would be on this issue here. It's not unacceptable in principle, it's the way it works on this particular limited site.
Thank you. I think Mr. Stranks has indicated that we're clearly looking at planning principles, but members have made points about animal welfare and perhaps contributions to those discussions should they come up in the future, because there's a clear will for members to have some information in that area. And as a council, in other meetings, we've clearly demonstrated our commitment towards our animal welfare. But what we're talking about here is a particular application. We've had a discussion about it. There's a recommendation for refusal with an additional recommendation within the addendum. So we'll now go to the vote. Those members in favour of the refusal, please indicate. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. That item is refused. Right. 25 to 10. Thank you very much.